How many of you turned on the heat this morning? I turned it on. I wanted to make sure it worked. Mine does. Well, I went to bed last night, or well, actually, I was a little cool in the house. I was wrapped up. My wife's thermostat and my thermostat are completely different. And so I said something about turning on the heat, and she said, "No, no, don't do that. It's going to be hot next week." Okay. Yes, ma'am. I'm not sure what that has to do with tonight, but anyway, okay. So we went to bed, and I got up this morning, it's 60 degrees in the house, and I'm first, up, take a shower, eat breakfast. I thought, no. So I turned it on. And when she got up, I confessed. I said, the heat's on. She said, I felt it. I said, well, I turned it to 66, and I said, it's working. So it's already 64. I was just testing it. I just turned it to 66. I didn't turn it to anything big. And so anyway, First Samuel 26. But no, our thermostats have always been very much different. Very much. In the summer, about the first week that she'd get out of school, for summer break, when she was teaching, the first week, one day I would come in at lunch and it'd be like a meat locker in the house. And I'd go turn it back, and she'd get mad, and I'd explain to her, you only got so much money in the month. You can't pay to keep a meat locker in here. So and then she'd get it. She just, but like I say, our thermostats are completely different. First Samuel 26 is where we are tonight. Very much a narrative. Very much. There are a couple of things we'll hit on maybe as we get time. I hope to at least hit on them as we get time. But we really began a section. Well, the next two chapters are of David, but we're really beginning a section through the rest of this book, which is we're almost finished, where you kind of go back and forth between David and Saul and David and Saul and David and Saul. There's nothing wrong with that. It just kind of you just really have to stay on your P's and Q's. I think that's one of the reasons that when I study First and Second Chronicles, I really have to stop and I have to think, where are we? Are we in Israel? Are we in Judah and the kings? And it gets confusing to the simple mind that I have. But it is interesting because I got to thinking today. I thought, I've never seen a timeline. I was reading something in preparation for class tonight, and it was talking about how long something was, this author was, and he said, we don't know how long it was, and we don't because text doesn't say. But I got to thinking about, I've never really seen a timeline or looked or studied a timeline of David's life. And so I went online and I got about four or five, well, I got five guys together. They all don't have a clue. They were all different. And that's to say we really don't know, how long things lasted. It doesn't tell us. How long did this event last? How long did David stay away? And so it's a guess. It's a guess how long David is fleeing from Saul. Anywhere from one guy said 5 years to another one said 20. So we have, and that's true. I mean, I understand why there's a difference. The Bible doesn't really tell us and doesn't really give us any points to fix anywhere down the line. So to know how and when and where. But what that tells me when I think about that and when I try to sit and figure out why that is, that tells me that what God wanted us to know is not exactly, well, this happened and then it was 2 years later and this happened and it took 3 days. He's not concerned with that. He wants us to see the story. He wants us to see how it fits together. He wants to see how, he wants to see, for us to see, excuse me, he's showing us. He wants for us to see the story, how that not only did he save Israel, but that how that line that he had promised that would get to the Savior, to Jesus, how it got there. And so while we look at this and we sometimes wonder why is this history here, it's invaluable to look at the line that God, how he preserves it, how he takes care of it. And David, as we look at this evening, David will admit to Abishai God's role in all of this. And let's look at it. The Ziphites we talked already about. They were found in the 23rd chapter. The Ziphites were folks that they were in Judah. They were the folks that basically betrayed David twice. They're going to do it here, but they were a small clan. Remember, and one of the things that I have to stop and think about, and I don't know, maybe you don't, but I have to stop and think about, is that when we talk about a lot of these places and a lot of these kings, remember, first of all, that there were many, many city-states. In other words, each city was a state. And so each city being a state would have a king. Also, there were clans, groups, families, if you will, that lived close together. I always, the first house that Ethan and Kara bought, there was a vacant lot across the street from that house. And I would often tell Kara when I'd come to visit Ethan and Kara, I would say, I bought that lot across the street. No, you didn't. Yeah, I did. I'm going to build a house on it. You better not. We're going to live right here close. So, but in biblical times, they did. They lived close. And so the Ziphites were really just a clan. They were in Judah. They, like I say, they betrayed David a couple of times. If you're interested, Psalm 56 gives you some insight that it could have been when the Ziphites betrayed David the first time in the 23rd chapter, or it could have been in this time. But he talks about folks being against him and what they did to him. And so that might help you a little bit. But anyway, the Ziphites came to Saul at Gibeah saying, is David not hiding in the hill of Hachilah, opposite of Jeshimon? Then Saul arose and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. Think about it for a second. How many men did David have? 600. A little overkill, isn't it? 3,000 versus 600, but nevertheless, verse 3, Saul encamped in the hill of Hachilah, which is opposite of Jeshimon, by the road. Excuse me. But David stayed in the wilderness, and he saw that Saul came after him into the wilderness. That David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul had indeed come. So here comes Saul. Saul had, from best we could tell, we mentioned this last week as we closed out chapter 25. Saul had pretty much said, and we'll hear again say, okay, I'm going to leave you alone. Had gone back, though, to Gibeah, his main headquarters, to just wait out David for a while, evidently. He probably, we don't know, but he probably got tired of chasing after David, couldn't find him. He probably had things at home, so to speak, that he had to take care of. Of course, being king, he would truly had things to do. He's back in Gibeah. He hears word. He gets then to the wilderness of Ziph, and he is searching for David. David sees him. David sends spies out. Yep, that's Saul. He's after us. So David arose, came to the place where Saul had encamped. And David saw the place where Saul lay. And Abner, the son of Ner, the commander of his army. Now Saul lay within the camp, with people encamped all around him. Then David answered and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, brother of Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with you. Now that's a terrible place to stop, but let's get a picture here, if you will. Let's get a little photograph of an understanding. In biblical times, an army that is, would go to a particular area and they would encamp. The leader, the captain, if you will, and in this case, of course, being the king, you had Saul, but you also had Abner, his captain of his army. These two would have been in the middle of the camp, and all the other soldiers would have been circled around their leader. So the leader was always, when they camped out, the leader, it makes sense, give the greatest protection to them, in the middle with all the soldiers around. Notice that it goes on to basically say what they did is they found their captain. They found where Saul was, and they found where Abner, the commander of the army, was. And notice that it says in verse 6, David answered and said to Ahimelech the Hittite and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah. Zeruiah was David's sister, interestingly enough, brother of Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul in the camp? And Abishai, being somewhat impetuous, said, hey, I'll go. Probably a young man. Yeah, I'll go. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and there Saul lay sleeping within the camp, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head, and Abner and the people lay all around him. Then Abishai said to David, God has delivered your enemy into your hand this day. Have you heard that before? You remember the cave at En-Gedi? Sounds just like it, doesn't it? Here's another opportunity. He's at your hand. Notice, though, that Abishai said to David, God. He gives the credit to God. This is a present, if you will, Abishai say, this is a present from God. Now, therefore, please, let me strike him at once. At once, does anybody have a different version that says something to the effect of one time? That's kind of one stroke. That's kind of the idea. Yeah, okay. Well, that's really the idea. With the spear right to the earth. And I will not have to strike him a second time. Sound familiar? You remember in the book of Judges, the lady that took the tent nail and hammered the dude's head to the ground? Yeah. They weren't brutal at all in those days. Whew. Nevertheless, that's what Abishai is proposing. I can take care of him for you. You appreciate, if you will, his eagerness. You don't know about it because it seems sort of brutal. Hey, I'll kill him for you. I'll kill him. But now imagine, if you will, that he's part of David's men, and he's been basically, David has, separated from family for years. I'll take care of him for you. This would get rid of the cause. This would allow us to live a peaceful life. This would allow us to go home. And David said to Abishai, do not destroy him, for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? In other words, you do this, anybody does it, but you do it, you're guilty. You're guilty of this man's blood. And David said, furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to... Excuse me, let me read this again. David said, furthermore, as the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall go out to battle and perish. In other words, David says, he's going to get his. He's either going to just die, the Lord's going to take care of him, or he's just going to go out to battle, and somebody's finally going to get him. Which, it makes sense, doesn't it? But David is willing to lay back and say, okay, we're going to let this be played out through natural means. We're not going to be the guilty party that takes, as he calls him, the Lord's anointed. We're not going to do that. So he says, verse 11, the Lord forbid that I should stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. But please take now the spear and the jug of water that are at his head and let us go. Once again, reminds us a little bit of En-Gedi. Remember when he cut part of the robe off of Saul's? Now he has the spear, and now he has the jug of water that would have been Saul's. So David took the spear and the jug of water by Saul's head, and they got away, and no man saw or knew it or awoke. That's amazing, isn't it? Hand of God? Could be. Who knows? For they were all asleep, because a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen on them. See, now that helps us to understand this is an event of God. God has aided in this. David went over to the other side and stood on the top of a hill far off, a great distance being between them. And David called out to the people and to Abner, the son of Ner, saying, do you not answer, Abner? Now remember who Abner is. Remember, we saw him, verse 20 or verse 5, excuse me. Abner was Saul's commander in chief of his army. So David calls out. David is a great distance now from where Saul and his men are, and he calls out. And he calls out to Abner, which is interesting. But he calls out to Abner, and Abner answered and said, who are you? Calling out to the king. So David said to Abner, are you not a man? And who is like you in Israel? Now Abner was known to have great strength. He was also known to have great experience and ability to fight. But David is asking him this question: who's like you in Israel? Why then have you not guarded your Lord the king? Now, don't get a sense of where he is calling Saul as Lord, but understand that this is what you called a king a lot of times, Lord, master. And so that's that sense, not Lord as we would think of God, but Lord from the standpoint of the king, the one that's in charge. For one of the people came to destroy your Lord the king. This thing that you have done is not good. As the Lord lives, you deserve to die, because you've not guarded your master, the Lord's anointed. And now see where the king's spear is and the jug of water, which was by his head. In other words, hey, look here, Abner, look what I got. What are you doing? Why aren't you guarding him? And because you're not guarding him, because I've got, his stuff, you should die. Saul knew David's voice. Remember, there was a great relationship early on. There was a great love, if you will, between Saul and David. And so Saul knew David's voice, and he asked the question, is that your voice, my son David? And David said, it's my voice, my Lord, O king. And he said, why does my Lord thus pursue his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in my hand? Now think about what he's asking. This is something that he's already said before to Saul, but he says it again. Why in the world are you hunting me? Why in the world are you after me? Tell me my charge. Tell me what I've done. Tell me what evil that I've done to you or to my people. In essence, have I broken the law? Have I done anything against you? Please let my Lord, great respect, please let my Lord, the king, hear the words of his servant. If the Lord has stirred you up against me, let him accept an offering. But if it's the children of men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Now, let's think about this for a minute. Let's think about what he's saying. He says, tell me my charge. Have I done something to you? Have I done something evil from the standpoint of broken the law, something that is terrible to men, to mankind? I need to hear, I want to hear what I've done. But then he goes on to say, he says, listen to what I've got to tell you. Listen to what I'm saying. I need to know who's stirring up all of this trouble. Is it the Lord stirring up this trouble, or is it the people stirring up this trouble? Has the Lord told you something about me, or has the people been talking about me? He says if it's the Lord, he'll accept an offering. But he says, if it is the children of men, may they be cursed before the Lord, for they have driven me out this day from sharing in the inheritance of the Lord. They have driven me away from my people. Sometimes families have dysfunction. Matter of fact, you could really say all families have dysfunction of one kind or another. There's really no true family that is just perfect. There's dysfunction somewhere in the family. Sometimes, though, the dysfunction is so great in the family that the family separates. There's somebody that in the family that just goes off and wants nothing to do with the family, cuts themselves off. I've had enough. I don't want to hear, don't want to talk to, don't want to be with the family. And they've cut themselves off. And there's nothing the family can do. But imagine, if you will, the family that is close enough that the dysfunction is not such where they've cut themselves off, but they want to be together. David wants to be home. David doesn't want to be out running around through the hills and countrysides, never really having a place to call home, never having anywhere to, if you will, so to speak, let him put his flag, let him say, this is home, I'm here, and come here night and after night after night. Wasn't like that. He was running around, and we even saw a few chapters back that he may have not stayed anywhere much. Say 2-3 nights, move on to the next place. Constantly on the move, constantly looking over your shoulder. And so David says, now, if this is God, he'll accept a sacrifice. If this is men, he says, let them be accursed. But he says, you've driven me out from the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. Now, Willis, I believe it is, in his commentary, excuse me, makes the statement. He says, we don't really know if they told him to go serve other gods, or if that was just sort of kind of what he added to the fact that they'd run him off. That they had run him not only out of town, but they had run him away from his faith. I don't know necessarily that they'd done that, but maybe that was what he perceived that they were trying to do. Push him away. Push him away. So now, verse 20, this is where I am. So now, do not let my blood fall to the earth before the face of the Lord. For the king of Israel has come out to seek a flea, as when one hunts a partridge in the mountains. He says this, I'm a nobody. He says, you've come out to fight some insignificant being when you've gone out and there are other, as we would say it today, there are other fish to fry. So Saul said, I've sinned. I've done wrong. Return my son David, for I will harm you no more, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Indeed, I have played the fool and erred exceedingly. So Saul admits that he's done wrong. This is important. Pardon me if I'm David to be skeptical of Saul. I mean, think about it. You've been run off from home, as David said. You've had people after you. You've done nothing wrong. You're an innocent man. And while you've had people after you, even though you're an innocent individual, the man that has led the charge against you has said, oh, well, I'm wrong. I'd be skeptical, at least right at first. Is he telling the truth? Is he really sorry for what he's done? Does he really mean this? Can I come out of hiding? Can I get close to him where he might take my life? Saul's admittance, at least, is that he's done wrong. He says, I'll harm you no more. And the reason he gives is true. He says, my life was precious to you. In other words, I owe my life to you. So while I have erred exceedingly, I've played the fool. I'll not seek your life anymore. And David answered and said, here's the king's spear. Let one of the young men come over and get it. See, David didn't ask Saul to come, but he asked one of the young men to come. May the Lord repay every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered you into my hand today, but I would not stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed. And indeed, as your life was valued much this day in my eyes, so let my life be valued much in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. This is what some would call a wish. Some have called it a prayer. Some have called it a simple desire of David. Saul, I valued your life. May the Lord value mine, and may the Lord deliver me. Whatever it is, I mean, if it is a prayer, it's beautiful. It's full worthy of what it says. If it is a desire, it's a great desire. If it's a wish, it's a great wish. But it's one of those things that David, okay, let's calm all of this down. Let's get back into what we should. So then Saul said to David, may you be blessed, my son David. You shall both do great things and also still prevail. This was probably by Saul, it was a forethought. It probably was not a revelation from God to Saul about David. In other words, this Saul just saw great things in David, and he believed that he would do well. And so he blessed him, and he says, you'll do great things and also still prevail. It'll be all right. Your life's going to be fine. You're going to get back to normal. Everything's going to be well. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his place. So David didn't say went home yet, but he went on his way. And Saul would have gone back, it says, to his place, and his place, of course, was Gibeah. So Saul goes back to Gibeah and goes back, really, if you will, as far as what we can tell, he goes back to, for a time being the king and serving in that capacity and waiting, of course, on David. David will later be anointed and be full king because Saul, of course, will die. But anything in that chapter, 2 or 3 things we want to make mention of, but is there anything in that chapter that you have questions or thoughts about? Well, I thought there's several things, but I thought 3 things that were kind of interesting in the chapter was, first of all, David's trust in God to deal with Saul. In other words, I'm not going to kill him. He had it right there. The power was within his hand. And seemingly because God had, as it says in let me get the right verse 12, God had, it says that a deep sleep from the Lord had fallen upon the man. David could have killed him, snuck out, walked out, left camp, not known. Folks wouldn't have known. They just woke up the next day. Somebody snuck in camp, killed Saul. But David just basically said, one day he's either going to die, God's hand's going to be at his death, or he'll just die in battle. So he had to trust. That's not always easy. It's not always easy to turn it over to God. Very first congregation I worked for as minister coming out of school had a lady, matter of fact, it's one of the deacon's wives. Good lady, nice lady, good lady. She could not turn loose of anything and let God take care of it, save her life. She was a control freak, if you will. Now, that helped her from a physical standpoint because she was like that. She was vice president of a bank in the community. She was vice president of it. So if you needed anything, I had to buy a car while I was there, I went in and talked to her. I didn't go talk to the president. I went and talked to her and had no problems. I had money in a couple of days. And so she was like that, and that was good in business, but not in life. And she worried about things to the fact that she died fairly young. And while I don't know, I had moved off and all, but I often wonder if she'd have let God handle more of her issues, she might have lived longer. She might have got to see her grandchildren. Don't know. Don't know. We need to learn to trust in God. Let God handle it. David was willing to let God handle the issue of Saul. Secondly, one of the great lessons that we learn is that David really was not safe anywhere. You might say, well, how do you apply that? Well, I think it like this. We're not safe anywhere either. Well, preach, that's why we lock doors, and that's, we have alarms and have firearms and all these other things. I get that. But we're not safe from Satan. It doesn't matter where we are. It doesn't matter if you're behind closed doors. There's plenty of things we don't need that's on the internet, on the TV set. It doesn't matter if we're out in public. Oh, we all know there's a lot of stuff out in public. We are always easy prey for Satan. And we need to remember that really we're not safe anywhere we go. Sunday night, Lord willing, our lesson is on Judas, entitled Judas, a Great Tragedy. Hope you'll come. Hope you'll bring somebody. It talks about, you might say, well, that's negative. Well, yeah, but it didn't have to be. Didn't have to be. But it was. And so we'll try to see, where did he fail? Where did he fail? Maybe it was the fact that he too was not safe from Satan. And then the third lesson that we might learn from this is the fact that we can return good for evil. Now, David doesn't always do that, sadly, but he does in this chapter. He values Saul's life, so he doesn't take it. So he returns good for the evil that had been perpetrated upon him. And it reminds us that we too have that calling and admonition to return good for evil, even when folks do bad things to us, to forgive individuals and to move forward. Life is about moving forward. If you stop and think about the Bible and you think about how God wants us to live our life, it's always in forward. It's not in neutral or reverse. It's always forward. There's just a thought through the whole Bible of moving forward in life. Anything else? Anybody like to say? Okay, well, the 27th chapter is short. Unfortunately, the thought question I wanted to talk about is lengthy, but we'll get through the chapter. That'll be good enough. David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. That was his thought. Saul's going to kill me one day. There's nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines. So David is going to go to the Philistines, and he's going to make a covenant with them. One of the things that if you look at a geographical, if you look at a map, start to say a geographical map, that's overkill. If you look at a map in biblical times, in David and Saul's time, you have Israel pretty much where it is today, but you had the Philistines had part of the land that came up kind of in the middle, if you will, in that area, and had a couple of fingers, what really would look like fingers as far as boundaries go, in Israel. And so Israel was kind of around Philistines. least part of the Philistine population. Some of it went on down into Egypt and into that area. But nevertheless, David goes to the Philistines, and Saul, notice what he says, I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me. In other words, he'll get tired of hunting me to seek me any more in any part of Israel. So I shall escape out of his hand. Then David arose, went over with 600 men who were with him to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. These are Philistine names. So he's going to the Philistines, if you will. David dwelt with Achish at Gath, he and his men, each man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelite, and Abigail, the Carmelites, Nabal's widow. And it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he sought him no more. Gath was a city, thus a city-state in the land of the Philistines. And David had gone there to get away from Saul because he felt like Saul's just going to kill me. And so David had fled and gone there for protection. David said to Achish, if I have now found favor in your eyes, let them give me a place in some town in the country that I may dwell there. For why should your servant dwell in the royal city with you? While David has entered into this sort of protection from Achish, there's a problem, evidently. David wants a little space, a little air. Can you put me outside the city a little bit? Can you let me? I need. You're probably saying, I need a little air. I need to get away from you a little bit. So Achish gave him Ziklag that day. Therefore Ziklag has belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. Now the time that David dwelt in the country of the Philistines was 1 full year and 4 months. One of the things that is interesting about this story is that David all the time was working for Judah, and Achish thought that David was working for him against Judah. So in other words, David had a pretty good con game going on with Achish. Achish was protecting him. Achish was giving him things because Achish thought he was working for him. The reality of it is David was working for Judah, working for Israel, working for God's people. Notice that it even says in verse 6, why, it belonged to the kings of Judah to this day. And David, verse 8, I've jumped down to verse 8. David and his men went up and raided the Geshurites and the Girzites and the Amalekites. Why didn't they have easy names like Paul and Ted? For those nations were the inhabitants of the land from of old as you go to Shur, even as far as the land of Egypt. Whenever David attacked the land, he left neither man nor woman alive, but took away the sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, and the apparel, and returned and came to Achish. And Achish would say, where have you been? Where have you made a raid today? And David would say, against the southern area of Judah, or against the southern area of the Jerahmeelites, or against the southern area of the Kenites. David would save neither man nor woman alive to bring news to Gath, saying, lest they should inform on us, saying, thus David did. And thus is his behavior all the time. He dwelt in the country of the Philistines. So Achish believed David, saying, he's made his people Israel utterly abhor him. Therefore, he will be my servant forever. So he's pulled off this con. He's helped his own people, while at the same time, too, you might say, well, he's treated Achish wrong. Well, yeah, he has. He has lied. Tells us several things. Now, the Bible nowhere commends David for his lie. Nowhere says that this was the right thing to do, but this was what David did. It begs the question, and that as we read the chapter and think about how that he was protecting his people, but lying to the individual that was protecting him, of when is it all right to lie? What does the Bible say about lying? Bible says Proverbs chapter 6, there's 6 things the Lord hates, 7 are abomination to him. What's one of them? Lying lips. Right? Uh, the psalmist, Psalms 15, ask, Lord, who will dwell in your holy hill? In other words, Lord, who in the world is going to make it to heaven? Well, you go down to about verse 3, and he says what? He says, individual tells the truth, implying that the liar will not get in. Revelation 21 tells us what? All liars shall have their part in the lake of fire, which burns with fire and brimstone. Colossians 3, Ephesians 4, where Paul in those 2 epistles talks about putting off the old man and putting on the new man, talks about putting away lying. And so you ask yourself, okay, is there ever a time to tell a lie and it be justified? And we color lies, by the way, right? There's white lies and there's black lies. A lie is told to deceive. But we ask ourselves, is there ever a time that you can lie acceptably? Acceptably, acceptably. When would that be? Now, I've just given you the case that you can't lie. Yeah, yeah. It falls in line with the argument that's so many times in ethics classes, and you have to take all those ethics classes. A policeman lies to get the truth out, and yeah, it was the same. It's the same twist of what you've said. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. This is the field I was in. I had to take all these. I don't. Let me stop and think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 or 5 of them. So, well, but from a standpoint of there are principles of straight, narrow. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah, yeah. But you know, it is a very difficult thing, and I think Steve gave a great example. You could do it in your house. Same principle. Somebody comes in your house, you got loved ones in the basement, are you going to, you're going to tell them, oh yeah, go down there and knock them in the head and see if they get any money too. So to do something does not mean that God says that it's okay. Would I lie to protect my son, my wife, my daughter-in-law, my granddaughter? Yeah. What would I do then? Beg and plead for God's forgiveness. And I'll leave that in the hands of God. From an ethical standpoint, there are times, however, we have stretched those ethics to the point of saying, well, I can go over here and I can lie to my friend. I can lie to my neighbor. I didn't tell them a big lie. I told them a little lie. I've counseled people. I've had people come in my office, not here, but I've had people come in my office and say, I told a lie. What'd you tell you? Oh, man. Used car salesman? Yeah.
You're interviewing, told them that they had certain absolutely.
Yeah.
So I often thought, kind of, a Christian be a policeman.
Right. So what it gets down to. So when no,
That every day.
the wind's a lie, and that's
When you go, that's a lie.
yeah.
You say we know that we reviewed the records, we found the issue. We didn't pay sales tax, pulled it low the tires.
Sure.
When David said they clearly didn't have that information, and they had some cases where the people said, "Well, that's a lie. I did pay it on that one. I didn't pay it on this other." They would have pay it.
Oops.
That's an interrogation.
Yeah. All the time.
Every day, we always
All the time.
okay for them.
But understand what they're doing. They are telling a lie. There's no, you can't get around that. To get at the truth. They're not telling a lie in order to lead them from the truth. They're trying to lead them to the truth. There we go. I'm sorry, I sat through 5 of those. Yeah, my mom and dad wanted to see their money given. Well, they didn't give, I gave. Never mind. But that's the great question. That's the great quandary, if you will. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with David. But David is lying at this point in time, but he is trying to help his people, and so problems do exist. No, right. That's what I was fixing to say. God does not commend what David did to that end, but it was a problem that David was willing to live with. Anything else? Because I hear the women are at the door. Sure. Yeah, and once you dig up one hole, you got to dig a second one to fill in the first one, don't you? Yeah. 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 It really is. I will not be here next week, so you will have a visiting speaker, right? So y'all now know who your visiting speaker is. So we're on vacation and we're together because we don't like each other. No, no, that's not true. We're gonna go down the road just a little bit next week for we don't know where. Well, we do know kind of where, but what for? Don't know what for, but just to see and be with each other. So get some rest. So anyway, you'll have a visiting speaker. It'll be excellent. Anything else we need to announce? Well, let's bow forward and pray. Father in heaven, thank you for this day. Thank you for the many blessings. Thank you for the opportunity that we've had to study your word. Thank you for your word and for the fact that it directs us in the way that we should live. We ask that you watch over us, that you bless us and keep us, that you hold us in the hollow of your hand. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. We'll see you Sunday morning, Lord willing. Study Matthew 12 and Matthew 18, and that's class. And Sunday morning, we're talking about God.